Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Chat Reality. I'm Michael.
And I'm Molly.
And today we are going through another episode of Survivor, another episode of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. And then we are, for the first time, covering the premiere of season 14 of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which I'm very excited about that is back. So let's go ahead and start with Survivor. Now, we come back from the last episode where Soul was voted out, and Teeny and Genevieve have a tense conversation. Teeny was left out of the vote, and they were very upset that Genevieve did not fill them in on that vote. So, Molly, how do you think that Teeny handled that conversation? And do you think that that this will be a turning point for their relationship?
Yeah. I think moving forward, of course, Teeny's upset with being left out of the vote there. But I think, and now, won't really want to trust Genevieve in that sense. But I feel like in the game of Survivor, even if you see that happening and you get blindsided by a vote, you end up still kind of working with someone sometimes down the line that I don't know if it's totally detrimental for the future if they could never vote together again or trust each other, but it definitely was interesting to see their conversation.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, I totally and completely understood how Teeny felt. I
Mhm.
would feel the exact same way. And I think that in that moment, that night right after Tribal, you just can't help your emotions sometimes. I feel like if Teeny had had a night to just sleep on it, they would have been able to probably have a bit of a different conversation with Genevieve and had Genevieve potentially even leave that conversation thinking that there is a chance that they could work together after this. And oh, I get it, I understand, blah blah blah. But in that moment, I completely understood why Teeny was not able to do that. They just had to, really be honest with how they were feeling and get emotional about it. And it was sad. And I agree with you though that I think this season in particular, it really does feel like there's no set real alliances that aren't willing to betray each other and then come back and vote again when it makes sense and then go back to not working together. Like things are so fluid that I think that's one of the hallmarks of the new era of Survivor, just that there's really no set alliances and set battle lines. Like there's just it's very fluid. And so yeah, I think absolutely in a couple weeks we could completely forget this ever happened and Teeny and Genevieve are going to be working together, yet again. So it'll be interesting to see how this all works moving forward. But we get next to the reward challenge, and Kyle, Rachel, and Sam win reward of a meal at the sanctuary where good things happen. And during that reward, Kyle pitches a plan to potentially target Gabe at the next tribal council with Genevieve as the backup plan. While Gabe, back at camp, we see is also pitching a plan to target Kyle if Kyle doesn't win immunity here. So, and that's in an effort to not have Fortuku still in the game as a glaring threat. So, do you think that, and spoiler alert, we know that Kyle ended up winning immunity, but if that hadn't happened, if Kyle and Gabe were both vulnerable, do you think that Kyle would have potentially gone home here?
Yeah, I definitely think there was a possibility of Kyle going home just because how big of a challenge threat he is. I think that would be a reasonable target for anyone to be like, okay, well, he didn't win. Let's get him out now. But I do think that having Gabe as the target for the week it made sense if wasn't the one who won immunity. Or if Kyle still was the one who won immunity. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting if Kyle had been vulnerable and if Gabe had also been vulnerable and Genevieve, I guess, and all three that are kind of being discussed here. I have to think that Kyle would have been the target. Like, I just can't imagine that they wouldn't again use that opportunity to get Kyle out. And now, especially, anytime that Kyle is vulnerable and is not voted out, I have to question the sanity of these people and think that they need to be given more food. Because there's just no world where after four immunity wins now that Kyle is vulnerable and you don't take that opportunity, like, I can't fathom it. So I have to think that next time he's vulnerable, they're going to take advantage of it, but
Yeah,
who knows?
agreed.
Well, before the immunity challenge, we have a little interesting moment here where we've seen this challenge all through the new era, that Jeff asks for 4 people to sit out in exchange for a large bag of rice that'll get them through hopefully the rest of the season. Well, Caroline pitches that 2 people may potentially be willing to give up their shot in the dark instead, since they weren't able to immediately get 4 people who were willing to sit out. Jeff declined that offer, but then Kyle pipes in and pitches that everyone might be willing to give up their shot in the dark in order for to get that bag of rice, which Jeff agrees to. Were you surprised that Jeff agreed to this deal? Do you think that it was a good deal? Would you have been willing to give that up if you were in the game? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad that Jeff agreed to it. I mean, we've discussed this before too, that the shot in the dark kind of isn't that great in our opinion of like, okay, like it's like they should be able to play the game and not have all these twists and turns in Survivor. So with that, I feel like the shot in the dark doesn't really matter all that much. Like people don't really tend to use it all the time anyways. That I think that for the players, it definitely was a good move for most of them, I would say, like, to do that, but then Jeff, like, accepting it was a little bit surprising at first. I was like, "Wow, like, that is kinda ballsy," but, I mean, because 'cause their shot in the darks are valuable to them, but not doesn't matter to him. So I think that it was interesting. I mean, best option was for or the best situation was for Rachel because she already used her shot in the dark, so she didn't have one to give up.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting because now we won't get to see any other shot in darks this season, which I think will be interesting because then no one's gonna be thinking, oh, they could be playing a shot in the dark. So we'll see how that will factor into votes as well.
Yeah, I have to say I was surprised that Jeff was willing to do this deal. I feel like this is a deal that even just a few years ago, Jeff probably would not have been willing to do. But I feel like he's kind of in this era of like wanting these types of moments where the players come up with this out of the box idea, and that Jeff is a lot more willing now to give in on something like that in an effort to encourage that type of creativity and deal making. And but I think like 10 years ago, no way in hell would Jeff have ever accepted that. And I think that the shot in the dark is not something that I forget that it exists sometimes when they don't talk about it in an episode. I forget that it's a possibility for people to play. And so I don't mind that we're getting rid of this. I mean, like I think we've seen one time that it was successfully used in the last 7 seasons that it's been in play. So I feel like it's not that big of a deal in terms of like missing something on the show. I guess it does create a level of, oh, you can't like complexity when trying to think of the vote. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how they play now without that at all in factor.
Yeah.
So now we get to the vote. So before tribal, well, Kyle wins immunity, as I mentioned earlier. So then before tribal, the vote seems to come down to Gabe versus Genevieve. Early momentum here leans towards Gabe leaving, but then Caroline agreed to it, but was worried about betraying Sue, who was very close with Gabe, and so Sue won't consider voting him out at all. If you were in Caroline's position and your closest ally was not willing to budge on a vote that you were really hoping to get in on, what would you do in that situation?
That's tricky because, like, obviously you want your ally to be on your side, but then that ally is close to the person you're trying to get out. So I think Caroline had to just accept defeat there. And, like, I would just be like, okay, like, I shouldn't try to budge on that. Like, I can get votes other places, which is what happened. So I think that it's hard to figure that out in terms of those relationships that are built, but it happens.
Do you think, like, would you, because Caroline ended up, as we saw, voting Gabe out and not, it seemingly not letting Sue in on it. Do you
Yeah.
think that she should have told Sue about it? Or was it the right move to not kind of poke that bear and potentially ruin the whole vote?
Yeah, I think it was good to not tell Sue because Sue would have told Gabe in that sense. Oh, I think she would have told Gabe saying that
Mhm.
they're going for you, and then he would have blown something up probably. So I think yeah, I wouldn't probably tell the closest person to whoever is getting targeted.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really tricky position, and I wonder how Sue's going to handle this because I mean, we saw how much she hates Kyle just because he put her name down. I mean, we got a whole montage on that. Like, I might be a little bit worried if I was Caroline that now Sue's gonna just be gunning after me for not letting her in on this and being the closest person to her. But maybe I don't know. Maybe Caroline feels like she's close enough to Sue that she can get this ironed out when they go back to camp, or maybe she did kind of let Sue in on it, and that's something that we didn't see. Maybe we'll kind of see in a flashback of Caroline telling Sue right before tribal or something, and telling her like, you know, don't vote for her, but or don't vote for Gabe to stay. Don't put his name down here. But I just want to let you know that this is happening, but don't tell anyone else that you know, type of thing. I don't know. I could see that as a possibility, but if, from what we saw, it doesn't seem like Sue was in on it. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out at the start of the next episode.
Yes.
Well, before they go to tribal, Rachel tries to shift the tides towards Genevieve. It's not enough, and like we said, Gabe ends up going home, being voted out by everyone except for Sue. Do you think that this was the right move, getting Gabe out instead of Genevieve for most people? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't like Gabe as much as I like Genevieve. So for me, I feel like I was glad to see Gabe go versus Genevieve. I think for the gameplay of it, like maybe it wasn't the smartest for everyone, but in terms of overall camp piece, I feel like it's good because a lot of people sometimes are annoyed but with Gabe or certain things that and sense that like he's always cocky and I don't know, it just kind of rubs people the wrong way sometimes, or at least it rubs the audience the wrong way for sure. But I think that it makes sense because he was definitely a strong player.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it makes sense. It's the right move because he's kind of, I think they're right that he's kind of the leader of the four Tukus that are left. And I think getting a Tuku out is really important here because if you leave four in the game, we're at the final eight now. That's half the tribe. That's half of your votes. So then, like, they could literally force a tiebreaker just by voting together as a tribe. So I think that that is the right call to cut them down to three, get rid of seemingly the strongest player who's not immune, and go from there. So yeah, I think that Genevieve, yes, Genevieve is a threat. She's a great player, but I think that it was not the right move to get her out right here. Like I think that can wait a week or two.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that's basically the rest of the episode, but we do have another piece of Survivor news that came out this week that we are getting one extra episode this season. That the finale night will only be 2 hours, but the episode before that, which normally would be the finale, will also be 2 hours. So we are going into finale night with only four instead of five, like normal. So, what are your thoughts on this change? I don't even know why they're doing this change. I don't know if you have any insight into why they might be doing this, but do we like it? Are we happy about this? Do we like the 3 hour finale event? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm actually excited for that. I feel like we'll get to see more in the actual finale episode now versus like I feel like sometimes the beginning parts of it when it still starts with five are kind of can be rushed in some ways and then you get to tribal the final tribal and then you're like okay like I want to actually see who wins and then have to wait and like I feel like it's just like you're waiting to the end and so this time I feel like it will just get to the good parts faster in the final episode and obviously you want to see all of it but sometimes when it is that final day, you're like, okay, let's just get to it here. So that's my opinion. I think it will be good for overall for the show.
Yeah, I like it too because I feel like when the finale is so long and we start with five that first tribal council kind of gets lost by the time the finale ends, and it feels like that's kind of old news when you're talking about it afterwards. And so now the final five tribal, I think, will kind of get the spotlight that it deserves because it often is an exciting tribal. As we get to the end there, it's really the last vote of the season because final four is fire making. And so now we'll be able to, I think, like talk about it, break it down, and in the way that it deserves to be talked about. And then going into the finale, it'll just be, the last tribal and then the final tribal. So I think that this is a good change, but I'm interested to see potentially why they're doing this. I feel like that they're confident then that the final four tribal and the final tribal will be exciting enough to warrant its own episode. So that's encouraging.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, me too. Well, now shall we get into Real Housewives of Salt Lake City?
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome. Well, this week's episode started out with we see Bronwyn and Todd having conversation post the trip and hearing Todd's concerns overall with seeing how Bronwyn was acting and overall just being on that trip definitely was not the right space for Todd. And sharing that with Bronwyn overall, just about the friendships with Lisa and all the stuff there. So, what were your thoughts on that conversation between them?
It felt like a father and daughter. Like it felt so, I don't know. It felt like Todd had no idea what show he signed up that Bronwyn signed up for, I guess. And I don't know. I just really felt like Bronwyn shrinks so much when she's with Todd versus when she's with the rest of the women. And it just feels like a different two different human beings. And it's kind of sad to see how Bronwyn just kind of really just deflates when she's with him, and that she just kind of accepts that type of being talked down to. And I don't know. I don't love what we see of their relationship, but I'm curious to see if Bronwyn gets on another season. Now Todd has watched the show. Todd knows what they're getting into when, they're filming a future season. I'm curious to see how their dynamic changes because I do think that there's a possibility that this isn't what their relationship is like normally. And it's just because Todd doesn't like filming, doesn't realize what they signed up for, didn't know what they were getting into, and is unhappy because of it. So I'll reserve too much judgment right now until we see more in the future.
Yeah, so I actually listened to Bronwyn also on the Vile Files this
I
week.
did too. Yeah.
And I feel like she gave a little bit of light to that in terms of like saying how Todd was very protective in that sense that like he was seeing how she was so worked up and that didn't make him happy either. So I think maybe that conversation also wasn't like a normal kind of conversation for them all the time, but it definitely wasn't great to see that. And it seems like he is generally supportive of it. And like he went to the Van Leeuwen event with Bronwyn.
Yeah.
So like he is part of it still. So at least that's a positive.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm curious because, like, if he's going to events like that with Bronwyn now, that does make me feel like he is supportive of her being on the show now. I just think that because this was still pretty early on into filming, I guess. I mean, we're what, 10 episodes in. So, I mean, we're halfway through, a little more than halfway through the season. So I feel like this is the point where he's starting to really realize what this show is. And he probably at first wasn't happy about it and was like, oh my God, this is a huge mistake. But hopefully, towards the end of the season, maybe even, or at the very least, I wonder, maybe he'll be at the reunion. I don't know. We'll see. Or at least she'll talk about it at the reunion, I'm sure. And then hopefully we'll get to see them both on another season and see how things have changed at all.
Yeah. We'll have to see. I hope we do because I love Bronwyn.
I
And
think we
then we also hear about how Angie brought a bottle of wine to Brittany's house with her church group. So do you think that Angie was wrong for that?
No, I don't. I think that I can understand why Brittany might be embarrassed by it because maybe she doesn't tell people that she drinks. Maybe that's something that she doesn't want out there so much. But I mean, she was drinking champagne at Mary's house at this dinner, but um, I could see that she would be upset. But I don't think that I don't blame Angie for it so much either because she's seen Britney drink, so that's not something that she would think, like, is a secret. I feel like Britney has to make that clear if she doesn't want like, she has to be like, "Hey, I do drink, but, like, don't make a big deal out of it. Like, I don't want people to know that, or I don't drink in this environment or whatever." Like, how would Angie know that that would be something that she would be unhappy with? So I can understand both sides, but I think that Brittany probably needed to be more clear about kind of her limitations with that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so too. I think that, like, there wasn't really an expectation set there, and so that makes it tricky of, like, she didn't really know, so it's hard to then, like, be in the wrong totally because there wasn't that expectation set.
Mhm.
But we'll have to see. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think it's kinda
obviously.
like what Heather said, like, in her confessional, I think, where it was like she would have been mortified if someone had brought champagne to an event like that. Like, it's just kind of that specific event, I guess, where it would be kind of mortifying, but in another occasion, it wouldn't have been a big deal at all. So, I guess it's one of those things that it's kind of like this arbitrary line that you've set that you then expect people to know about when there's no way that they would.
Yeah. Exactly. So they'll move forward from that, so it's fine. Um, but then there's also more conversations that obviously about Bronwyn's marriage, which we're also talking about here. But thoughts from Brittany and Heather. So what were your thoughts on them and their comments about Bronwyn's marriage?
Yeah, I don't really know why Heather's so hung up on the prenup. Like, I agree with Heather. Like, I think they probably should have a prenup. I support that in most cases, but I don't know why that's any of Heather's business. Like, it's not at all, and it's just kind of weird that this keeps being brought up. And it, I don't know. I feel like Heather is so scarred by Jen Shaw, by Monica, that I feel like any new girl that comes into this group is just going to have a hard time from the beginning because it's going to take a lot, I think, for some of these women to let a new girl in fully. Because I mean, they've been trauma bonded. Like, I have to say, I think that a lot of people are not understanding why these girls are so hard on Bronwyn, but and I agree that they're being hard on her for sure. But I think you have to kind of put into context what these girls have been through these first 4 seasons with everything with Jen, everything with Monica. Like it's been a lot that they've gone through. And so I can completely understand them being skeptical, but I think they have to realize why they're acting like that it's not on Bronwyn, it's not on Brittany. Well, okay, Brittany's putting it on herself, but Bronwyn in particular, like I think they just kind of have to take a step back and realize that it's really them being too hard. It's not really anything much that Bronwyn's doing.
Yeah, agreed. So we'll have to see how that continues to play out. But I think obviously it's like initiation almost. It's like they have to like get her in the group sort of, and it's just not easy for her right now.
Yeah.
And then we also hear about how Bronwyn wanted Heather to come on the trip. So do you think that's true, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that Bronwyn probably went into that conversation with Heather that they had right before the trip with the intention of the possibility that Heather could be invited. I and look, I question how much power Bronwyn really has with that. So I just don't know. I feel like production, like if Bronwyn just randomly said like, I don't want Heather coming on this trip. I don't think she has that power. So I think that like there I I think that production maybe went into that conversation not knowing for sure which way it was gonna go. Like, I think that they needed it to make sense if Heather was gonna come on, so I think that they probably told them both, like, "Hey, however you end this, like, is gonna determine, I guess, if Heather is able to come on. Because like, why would Bronwyn logically, normally, if this wasn't being filmed, invite Heather? Like, she wouldn't. So I think that they needed to end that conversation on a good enough note for it to logically make sense, and it didn't. So then Heather didn't get the invite. But I guess I believe that Bronwyn was at least open to that possibility. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I mean, Bronwyn seems like she wants to be friends with everyone she can be, like, she gives everyone opportunities, so I would agree in that it's like, she would have wanted her there, but it's like, really wasn't totally up to her.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and then what were your thoughts then on Heather lying about her birthday?
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Is she just lying about the year, or is she lying about the day? Because
I
that would
don't
be
know.
weirder. The year, I could get behind potentially, but like still kind of weird. But why would you lie about the date?
I don't know. It's weird because
I
I feel like she also wants the attention, so it's like, you give it on your real day.
Yeah, I don't know. Like that just feels like strange to me. Like I don't know. There's a potential pattern here of Heather not being fully truthful about things, like with her black eye years ago, with this birthday, with like I don't know. There's some weird stuff that like we find out that makes me kind of like tilt my head a little bit about Heather, but I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, it's interesting. I feel like there's still so much that I'm learning about all of these ladies just because this is only my real, like, first season of watching this season
Yeah.
of the show, so it's all interesting learning about all the stuff that I have. But next, we also hear about Meredith saying to Angie about going backwards, so do you think that she was threatening there?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I mean, I think it's kind of like, last season how she said, "Are we gonna go there with the husband?" I think that Meredith kind of likes to throw out those little vague insinuations of like, "I know something that I'm not gonna tell you, but if you push me, I'm gonna say it." And then, tries to backtrack on that, being like, "Oh no, I'm saying I don't want to do that." But there's that poking of like, don't go there with me, don't push me, or I'm gonna say everything that I know, which is it's just kind of a threat. So yeah, I do think that. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess like in this show, you also just want to say things that can get the attention, I think, sometimes of the producers that air the show or edit the show and then we'll air it so that she gets more of that time potentially. I don't know if that's the reason, but like in general, like that's what sometimes I think about in these shows that I'm like, this is all drama. Like, are they saying this to be real about it or are they saying this as like to threat something that's like maybe not going to really do it anything, but just the threat of it still counts as something.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we saw that like going way back on Beverly Hills. Actually, Kim Richards, when they were in Amsterdam, said to Lisa Rinna, like, "Oh, are we going to talk about the husband?" And for years, it was like, "What does Kim know? What was Kim insinuating?" Blah blah blah. And I mean, Lisa Rinna almost went across the table and choked her. And like it seemed like, well, is there something there? And then like, years later, Kim was like, "Oh no, I didn't really have anything. I was just kind of like saying that." So you never know, like whether there's actually anything, or whether it's kind of the threat of like trying to get Angie to go crazy of like, what does she know? What is she trying to insinuate here? So I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, but it certainly seemed like a vague threat to me that she has some sort of piece of information she's holding on to.
yeah, for sure. But we'll have to wait to see if that comes up again. But Meredith is then playing a recording of the podcast audio of Sean, and then Whitney just grabs the phone out of Meredith's hand while the podcast is playing to pause it. So obviously made for some good TV, but what were your thoughts on that moment?
I was really confused. I don't know. It seemed like Whitney was pressing a lot of buttons, and I'm like, "What were you really doing?" But then when she gave the phone back, it was still on the podcast, so it didn't seem like she, like, went into her texts or photos or anything like that. Like, it did seem like she stayed on the podcast, but I wasn't exactly clear what actually she was doing there because it seemed like too many buttons to press pause.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm like, does she not see the big circle in the middle bottom that
Yeah.
you have to press?
Or, like, I forgot, did she say she was pausing or making it louder? But either way, that was too many buttons to press.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was pausing, but
I
wasn't
can't
up.
remember, but either way, it did not seem like she was doing what she said she was doing, but then, also, I don't know what she was trying to do there. That was very confusing to me, but it was funny because, like, that was in the trailer for the season, and the whole time I'm like, "Oh, I really wonder, like, what is Whitney grabbing the phone for?" And, like, this was not what I thought it was. Like, I thought she was trying to, like, find something in Meredith's phone, that to, like, prove something, but nope, she was just trying to pause a podcast. So that was not on my bingo card.
No. But then Meredith was yelling, and causing a scene there at the party. So do you think that Mary was justified in asking her to leave if she wouldn't stop yelling? And then we see that Meredith does leave. So what were your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, I think that Mary was absolutely justified in yelling at both Meredith and Angie to
Yeah.
stop screaming at each other. I mean, at a certain point, it's like, okay, we can't actually understand what either of you are saying because you're just screaming at each other, and it's not about Brittany, and it needs to be about Brittany. She nothing is about her. She doesn't get the time that she deserves. And I think that Mary absolutely needed to get them to stop yelling so that we can make it about Brittany
Yeah, exactly. That was so funny when Brittany just stood up. Excuse me, everyone. Why is no one caring about me?
again. That was so Sheena coded.
Yeah, that really was.
I loved that moment. I took a little clip of that and saved it on my phone because anytime there's a group message and people are going back and forth and I am not included in it, I'm just going to send that to them.
Wait, can you send that to me too? Because I think
Yes, I
that's
will.
hilarious. Perfect. Well, that's it for Salt Lake City this week. Now let's jump into Beverly Hills.
Yes. Okay. So Beverly Hills season 14 premiered last night or last week. And I thought it was great. I thought this felt very rejuvenated. It felt like I love the production value of everything. It felt like they took a step up with that. And I thought it was great. But Molly, this is a new franchise for you. It's your first episode of Beverly Hills ever, I believe. So what are your thoughts on the premiere?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I feel like I've heard some of it from you, or just like understanding that this is like the Real Housewives. Like it's like this is the one. And so I think I have seen like clips of it here and there, and I've had friends who've had it on. I've probably like passively watched it, but it's my first time like actively watching the episode. And yeah, it was crazy. Like it was like wow, like these outfits that they're wearing to this party, like all the production related to the rest of the show as well, like not just that event, but like I feel like the whole episode of it was all really produced well. So overall, like, and there's so many layers of drama in the season already. I feel like that it's gonna make for a really great season. So I'm excited.
Yeah. No, I absolutely think that these days Beverly Hills is like the crown jewel of Bravo in general and definitely of the Housewives. It's the highest rated one currently. It used to be Atlanta for a long time, but Beverly Hills has surpassed Atlanta over the last few years. And yeah, I thought that I mean, I feel like they just the I don't even know how to describe it, but I feel like the cast that they get for Beverly Hills, they're so accomplished. They're so like well regarded and connected in the community and like I mean, look at Boz, the new housewife, or Bose, excuse me. Like, she worked for Netflix, she worked for Apple, I think. Like, she's like just this corporate, like, she just has this like aura about her that is just so like, I mean, compare her, I feel like, to like new housewives on other franchises, and it's just like night and day.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just think that Beverly Hills is like kind of just everything is like a step up, and I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, the main storyline for this episode, I would say, the main headline here is Dorit and PK separation. So Dorit kind of goes around. First, she tells Erica about it, and then she kind of goes to Kathy and some of the other women to tell them the news. What were your thoughts on how she handled that? As she kind of also outed PK as an alcoholic when she was explaining that to everybody. What were your thoughts on the way that she kind of went about all that?
Yeah, I feel like it definitely could have been gone about in a better way. Like, I feel like she was airing a lot of stuff that maybe she could have kept a little bit more private. But of course, like, these are her friends or people she wants to talk to about the situation. And so it makes sense of her like sharing her feelings and all that stuff. But I think bringing into the alcoholism of it all like wasn't great, because that's obviously like something that's personal to PK. And so that side of it, like, I think was too highlighted in the sense, like, I think she could have highlighted more into other areas maybe that weren't working out well, and like not as much into that side of it as specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like like she I mean, she knew Bose for about 14 seconds before she started spilling all of that to her. And I mean, yes, on one hand, it's like, okay, we know that this is where the conversation's supposed to go. We're at the premiere party. I'm just, you're the new housewife. I need to explain all this to you. So I get that, but it just was funny how it was like, oh my god, we literally just met, and she's talking about being a widow. Dorit's talking about being separated. It was just like this heavy conversation in a split second. So yeah, I mean, I think that Dorit has gotten some flack in the past for not really revealing much about her being super open what really is going on in her life. There's always been this speculation about her and PK's marriage, and she's always denied it. And then there's been like reports going around that Dorit, that is not talking about, not referencing, hiding. Like, so I think that she felt like she needed to be open. I'm sure there was a little bit of pressure from producers to be like, yeah, we need you to open up what really is going on, and not hide it anymore. So I think that she was trying to show here, like, yeah, I'm just going to give everything so that I don't get demoted.
Yep, that makes sense.
But we do get two new housewives. Well, one friend of the cast, Jennifer Tilly, and a new housewife, Bazoma St. John. What are your thoughts on both of them from what we saw so far?
Well, I know you already highlighted Bose, but
Yeah.
I also love seeing her, come onto the show. I feel like when they said that she was CMO of Netflix and all that stuff, like, it definitely seems like she has some high praise, which is exciting to see, like, someone like that, and, like, she's already seems great from what we've seen of her, so I'm excited to see more of her. Same with Jennifer, I feel like she just has good personality. I mean, you have to be in Real Housewives, so I think that they'll be great additions.
Yeah, Jennifer Tilly's hilarious. I mean, we've seen her like kind of on and off a little bit throughout the years. I mean, she's a huge name. Like, I was surprised that she was even willing to do this show in any official capacity, honestly. But she's a really good friend of Sutton's, and so that's
Mhm.
why we've seen her throughout the years that since Sutton's been on. And yeah, I just think like Beverly Hills sometimes has a tendency to get very serious, very dark, and I think having Kathy Hilton when she joined, that was, a levity that we got on the show. I mean, we saw in just this episode, Kathy like taking out her hair extensions in the middle of the party. Like, that's just classic Kathy Hilton. Like, I mean, that's, she loves pranks. She loves moments like that. Like, she's no shame, just willing to bear it all. And I feel like Jennifer Tilly's kind of similar, like, some needed levity on this show, some needed comedy. And I love that that she's going to be on the show a lot more this year. I think that she's going to be great. And then yeah, Bose is fantastic from what we've seen so far. I think it's obviously super early to judge. We haven't seen her do too much yet, but just her background and from what we've seen so far, yeah, I think that she fits in great, it seems like. And I love that she's getting super close to Dorit because Dorit doesn't have many really close friends on the show right now. So I think it's really good that the new housewife is gravitating towards Dorit because I think she kind of needs somebody like that she can lean on.
Yeah. No, for sure. That will be good for her to have that friend there.
Yeah. Well, especially because Dorit and Kyle right now are not getting along so well. So this was kind of shocking in a way because they've been so close on the show for the last 7 years since Dorit came on. Like they have immediately became very close, and then it seems like this was kind of a long time coming since potentially 2 reunions ago, the season 12 reunion, maybe there was kind of the start of this break between them when Kyle was feuding with Kathy, her sister, and Dorit kind of chimed in a little bit, and Kyle didn't appreciate that. Then we saw everything with BravoCon, Watch What Happens Live. There were kind of all these little moments that have added up, and now we're at this point where they're not on speaking terms. So what were your thoughts? And I know you don't have all the background here, of course, but they did, I feel like, do a pretty good job of explaining it. So from what you saw, whose side are you on here?
Yeah, I feel like it's hard because I really don't know all of the background in it entirely. But it's interesting because obviously, like, if they were so close, like, it's obviously a big deal of like seeing this all go down like this. And I feel like just because I know Kyle slightly more, maybe I'm more on Kyle's side here just because of that, but I don't really know entirely of like whose side I even should be on in this moment.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. Like it's I would say that I think in this episode I gravitated a little bit more towards Dorit's side,
Mhm.
just because I feel like some of the examples Kyle was giving of why she was upset with Dorit didn't seem like that big of a deal. Like
Yeah.
Dorit joking at BravoCon about who her favorite sister is, like that felt like something that Kyle was even laughing at in the moment. Like Kyle spilled the drink on Dorit. Like, yeah, it was a joke that Kathy was number one, Kyle was last. Like I think for Kyle to be bringing that up as an example is a little ridiculous. Now, if Dorit was going around behind the scenes at BravoCon talking about, oh, Kyle's not really that upset about her separation, she's faking the emotions, blah, 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 that's a different story. If that was happening, yeah, like I can completely understand why Kyle would be upset. But I just think, like, when you bring up a moment like that in trying to give your side of the story, it takes away from the legitimacy of it for me because it's like, okay, that's important enough that that's an example that you're giving in this moment. Then I don't know that I quite understand it so much.
Yeah, that's fair. That would make sense.
Yeah, but I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. I mean, it ended on a to be continued, so we're going to see more of their conversation, and then we'll, I'm sure, throughout the entire season, we're going to be seeing this play out. So there's plenty more of that to come. But we did see in this episode that Erica was really kind of the mediator between Dorit and Kyle, kind of going back and forth between them and getting both of their sides of the story, trying to say how the other was feeling. Do you think that Erica did a good job of doing that?
Yeah, I think she did. Like, I was thinking that, I mean, obviously, you don't want to really be in the middle of that, but I think that she was doing a good job overall of hearing both sides.
Yeah, I think that she's the only person that could do that because nobody else on the cast is friends with both of them to
Mhm.
that degree. So I think that I mean, thankfully Erica is there. Like, I don't know exactly what we would do if there wasn't someone like Erica there to mediate between them because otherwise I don't know how they would ever kind of end up in the same room together. So I think that, yeah, Erica did a great job in not taking one side or the other, not bashing either one of them, but also not uh, actively taking either of their sides. So I think that she did a good job of just kind of being there as a soundboard, let them vent to each other, and then, kind of take that to the other one and relay the messages that they want relayed and not relay what they don't want relayed. So, yeah, I think that Erica did a good job, and I hope that she's able to bring them to a bit of a better place, which it does sound like they get to by the end of the season, that they're in a better place than they start with. So, I'm happy that that is the case, and hopefully that sticks when they are watching the episodes back, because I know that that can be that can put two people who have gotten to a better place right back into a worse place. So we will see. But that is all we have for you today. So we will be back next week for more on all of these. And be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to your podcasts and follow us at Let's Chat Reality on social media. And we will be back next week. So thank you all so much for listening. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.